But after Mrs. Merton, everybody talked to me and shouted at me, and in London for years, and I mean years afterwards, taxi drivers would shout at me if I was walking along the road, something to do with Mrs. Merton, how's your millionaire husband, Deb, and things like that. And everybody knew who I was.
Hello everyone, my name is David Hill and welcome to my new celebrity podcast, Schmoozing, where I take a deep dive into the careers and lives of some of my favourite people and friends. Today's episode is brought to you by the talented team at 12A Studios, and here with me, controlling all things technical, is Mr. Jack Pallister. Hello, Jack.
Hello, David. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. I'm very much looking forward to what I think is going to be a very showbizy episode.
Oh, showbiz royalty indeed. Now, David, I got a real surprise this week because I had a knock at the door the other day and went to answer it, and there was a beautiful bouquet of flowers for me on the doorstep, and I have no idea who they're from.
You have literally no idea, Jack.
Literally no idea. I think I've got a secret admirer. How many episodes have we done now? 3 or 4, and I have a fan. I have a secret admirer.
That would be driving me mad.
Well, if you're out there and you're listening, feel free to get in touch and let me know. We'll go for a cheeky gin and tonic when the pandemic is over. Yeah, talking of gin and tonics, what are we having today?
Well, Jack, this is one of the gins that I will often recommend to people. It's by Sipsmiths, which is one of my favourite brands. And of course, you can get Sipsmiths in many of the supermarkets. And it's their orange and cacao drink, which I mix with a Folkington's Earl Grey tonic and a slither of orange to top it all off. And it is absolutely jaw-droppingly good, I would say, as a G&T.
Is it really, though? Because, I mean, cacao is basically chocolate. So you're basically saying it's a chocolate gin.
Yeah, it's very subtle. The flavouring is very, very subtle. And that's why it works. And it really is incredible. I've never recommended it to anyone who hasn't been impressed.
Well, I love chocolate orange. I mean, Terry's chocolate orange, anything like that, I'm in. So it sounds incredible. But not as incredible as what you're wearing. What is that scent, David?
Well, Jack, as you know, I love wearing cologne. I don't feel dressed without it. But this is actually a cocktail. I have layered 2 colognes to create this fabulous waft that you can smell in the studio. So this is Joe Malone's orange bitters layered over the top with Joe Malone's whiskey and cedarwood, and it's a sensation, Jack. You've got to admit.
It is a sensation. You're like a aftershave connoisseur now. Now, if you enjoy listening to today's very special Showbiz episode, please remember to rate, review, and of course subscribe to our various channels. Now, I'm very, very, very excited about today's guest because she's one of my childhood heroes. And actually, David, we share quite a lot in common because we were both born in Kingston upon Thames. We both, at some point in our lives, trained at the Royal Ballet School, and we've both been magicians' assistants. I mean, hers was probably much more glamorous, and mine was a very fleeting moment in a European show. But nonetheless, we share that as well. I mean, you must be able to guess who I'm talking about, David.
It can only be the fabulous Debbie McGee.
You mean the lovely Debbie McGee?
Yes. So, for today's episode, I am joined through the wonder of technology in the studio by Showbiz royalty, and I've been excited all week to say this, the lovely Debbie McGee. Hi, Debbie.
Hello, David. What a lovely introduction.
I've been so excited to say those words, the lovely Debbie McGee, all week.
And you know where it came from.
I
The very first appearance I did on the first BBC TV show of the Paul Daniels Magic Show, I was, Paul introduced me as the lovely Debbie McGee. So that was 1982, and it stuck.
And it really did stick, didn't it? I mean, everybody kind of knows you. And if you read any press or, magazines or anything that you do, it always comes in as the lovely Debbie McGee.
Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it?
But you are lovely, Debbie. So, it's a fitting description. Now, here's a question for you. I just wondered whether you knew how long we had known each other. Because I was trying to think about it, obviously in preparation for this interview, and I thought, well, I'm going to throw the question to Debbie, see if she knows.
No, I don't, David. Go on, surprise me.
Well, in fact, what I should have done, Debbie, was I should have actually called our dear friend, mutual friend, Kev Orkian, and asked him, because I'm sure that we met through Kev when I was looking after Kev and looking after his career. And I have a feeling that we met for the first time. I know we've met lots of times in this world of show business, but I think we met in Edinburgh. I think so.
Oh, so that was, yes, and it was 2012.
2012. So
there you go.
9 years ago.
Yeah, gosh.
Incredible. Yeah, no, incredible. Brilliant. Well, I'm going to talk about Edinburgh afterwards, actually. I'm going to mention Edinburgh afterwards because there was something that happened in Edinburgh that has actually stuck with me all these years, these 9 years that we've known each other. But I want to start off by just kind of diving into your early career because some people may know it, but other people may not. But you actually auditioned for the Royal Ballet, didn't you?
I auditioned for the Royal Ballet School, and at that time, they had a dancer's course and a teacher's course. And the teaching course, you still had to be the standard of the school to get in. But if your body wasn't quite right, then, you could get on to the teacher's course as long as your dancing was good. Where the dancer's course, like a friend of mine didn't get in because her left hip was 1/8 of an inch higher than her right hip. It was that exact. And my father, who was very wise, said to me, if you want to do this as a career, why don't you go on the teacher's course? I know you want to dance, but it means you'll have a diploma at the end of it that if dancing doesn't work out, you can teach and you get a better education. So that's what I did. And I went on the teacher's course. And so I was really lucky because my body was like the dancer's course and my exam results were as good as the dancer's course and things. But of course I left with, all the degree diplomas and all my certificates. But the only thing I couldn't do was, get into the Royal Ballet Company. But you had to be exceptional to get in. And each year, it was a good year if they were taking 3 girls from the school. So, really, the chances I would have ever got in were so minimal anyway.
But what clever advice from your family, because you are not from a show business family, are you?
No, my dad was Irish and he didn't drink, amazingly, but he was just one of those wise people that we would probably now, well, in the olden days, call a sage. Everybody in the family would turn to Dad for advice, and he, it was always sensible, lots of common sense, and and he's gone now. But my sister and I were just talking yesterday and saying, we really miss not having Dad there to just go to with anything in life. He always had the right answer. And at that time, I was 16. I didn't want to go and do a teacher's course. I never wanted to teach. All I wanted to do was dance. And I only auditioned for the Royal Ballet School because my dancing teacher said, you've got everything right in physically. So, it's such a rare thing to get in. You should apply. Where I really wanted to be in showbiz. I love the glamour, ballet, I loved ballet, but to me, I couldn't actually express my personality and have all the jokes that I was used to playing. But of course, yeah, but with Dad, with his wise advice, it actually was an amazing training. And, I've never, ever regretted it whatsoever.
Well, I'm going to tell you something now, Debbie. My mother is Irish and she does drink.
Cheers to your mum, David.
She will kill me for announcing that on the podcast.
But it's my dad. We used to say to Dad about him not drinking and coming from that culture, and he just didn't like the taste of alcohol. It wasn't for any other reason. He said every time I've tried a glass or something, sometimes at Christmas we could get him to have a snowball, Avocat with lemonade. But that was a rare Christmas. But yeah, there you go. It's funny, isn't it? We're all so different.
We are, and I completely understand that because I mean, I love a gin and tonic. I love a spirit, but I don't drink at all. Much to the amazement of my friends and Jack, who's in the studio. I don't like wine, I don't like champagne, and I don't like beer. And I don't like it. I just don't. And everybody that knows me thinks I'd be this incredible wine connoisseur, and I just don't like it, Debbie. So I kind
David,
of get
I'm
it.
Sorry, I have to go. I can't talk to you anymore.
Now, I'm going to say two words to you that I never thought I would say in a Debbie McGee interview. And those two words are Iranian Revolution, Debbie.
Yes.
Explain that to me.
Well, I don't know if you or anybody listening has seen the Ben Affleck movie Argo.
I have.
That's right. Well, if you can remember that movie, just imagine that I was with them. I wasn't, of course, because it's a movie, but that is exactly what I went through. So to summarize it, I was in my final year at the Royal Ballet School, auditioning for different ballet companies. And then I saw an audition for the Iranian National Ballet, which was like our Royal Ballet. They had an opera house called Rudaki Hall in Tehran. I always loved traveling. So the fact of going to the Middle East or something, at 19, it was something I was excited about. They were paying 5 times more than the Royal Ballet were, and could afford all the big American choreographers and sets and costumes. So obviously to a 19-year-old, this sounded good. So I auditioned for the Iranian National Ballet and flew to Iran and had a flat in Tehran, and I'd been there 6 months, and we were rehearsing and we heard all this noise going on outside, so we were all looking out of the windows, and it was a riot, and it was students that if they were anti-Shah, so if anybody had anything that they could see that was opposing them, they would beat you up or whatever. But then it all went quiet, and we found out it was all to do with Jimmy Carter being president of America. And if you were white, they thought you were American. They would, beat you up or whatever. But then life went back to normal. And so we carried on rehearsing. We had Sleeping Beauty coming up, and I remember we were rehearsing 2 other ballets at the same time. And then it all blew up again. And basically all the administration from my company fled the country and kind of left all the dancers. And I had this plan that I would go to Iran, see the country, save loads of money, and come back and buy some properties. I was going to stay there for 3 years. So I'd already saved a lot of money. And so I had enough money to actually get on the last plane out of Tehran before they were closing the airport. But when I got to the airport, I was with 2 other people, went through customs. When I'd applied for my visa, they'd crossed something out and rewritten it. And they thought I'd done that. So they threw me in a room, and my 2 friends had gone on ahead. And one of them came back and said, she's with us and blah, blah, blah. Anyway, they threw him in this office with me. And we knew that the plane, was taking off in an hour. So obviously it was a very scary time. And luckily there was a young customs guy that came in. I fluttered my eyelashes. And like in Argo, he stamped our passports and said, run. And we literally ran past the guys with machine guns across the tarmac, really like in a movie. up the steps on the plane. It was going to Switzerland. They closed it and it took off, and we literally escaped. I left all my clothes and everything. I just had one little bag, and that was it.
That must have been pretty scary.
Well, I've summarised the story. I mean, yes, it was. Living there for that month, they were, blowing up houses and literally lighting exercise books and putting them through people's letterboxes and stuff like that. And then at one point, when it was really bad, all the Western people that were there, because we had quite a few Europeans, we all moved into one apartment block, and the boys used to go out at 7 a.m. to literally find any food we could get, which was these great big, like the base of a pizza bread that they ate, and rice, and like some tins. I can remember we used to have loads of rice with tins of sweet corn and frozen peas, and not much else. And one day somebody got a couple of pots of jam, and we were all like, oh my gosh, jam on the bread, And we used to do classes every morning in this house to keep ourselves fit. And all sorts of things happened. A couple of the boys went out to try and shop, and a whole gang of the students that were rioting came down the road. They were white, so they just, thought that they were American, and did some horrible things to them. And others got hidden in the back of shops, because the normal shop people, weren't against us or anything. So, and then, as I said, I was so lucky that I'd saved so much money. I knew somebody in the Foreign Residence Bureau that knew somebody in the airlines. And I paid about 10 times what it would normally cost to fly out of there. But, thank heavens that I had the money and I got out, because the ones that were left all ended up having nervous breakdowns and things, and eventually were flown back by the Swiss embassy.
Wow. What a story. So you get back, you've left your belongings in Iran, you come back, luckily you've got some funds behind you. What happens next in the story?
Well, I didn't really have any funds left after I paid for the flight, and then I needed to buy new everything. I literally had probably one change of clothes and a toothbrush and stuff. So, luckily I could go back and live with my mum and dad, but I needed a job. So all the ballet companies were full. And as I'd said earlier, I just wanted to be in show business. I didn't really care what I did. There's that old show business joke, isn't there, in the circus, where this guy is out at a bar and, the girl says, oh, what do you do? And he said, oh, I'm in show business. He said, doing what? And he said, I'm in a circus. She said, well, what do you do in the circus? And he was the elephant poo shoveler, to be polite. Well, I wouldn't have quite gone that far, David, but I just wanted to be in show business. So in those days, there were summer shows all around the country, like every seaside resort had either a theatre at the end of the pier or converted cinema or whatever. And the Delphont organisation were like probably like Andrew Lloyd Webber or the Really Useful company. They put on all these shows, so they'd have one audition that really was a cattle market with a couple of thousand girls, and they would say, right, we've chosen 100 of you, and this 10 are going with Des O'Connor, this 10 are with Russ Abbott. In those days it was the 80s. Little and Large, I can remember, was another one. And then my 10 we were put with Paul Daniels. Now, Paul had become famous while I was living in Iran, so I had no idea who he was or what he did, but I needed this job. Signed the contract, 4.5 months in Great Yarmouth, due to start in 6 weeks' time. And then, said to everybody, well, what does he do? Is he a comedian or is he a singer? I didn't even know what he looked like, And they said, oh, he's a magician. And I went, oh, no, I hate magic. Oh, God, I've just signed to work with a magician for 4.5 months. Oh, no. Anyway, in between then and starting rehearsals, the only thing I saw Paul on, because there wasn't Google and that in those days. Of course not. Was Blankety Blank in the days when Terry Wogan hosted it. And Paul had, I can remember, I don't know what the line was, but Paul had obviously set it up with Terry's writer, but Terry didn't know what was going to happen. And Terry asked a question, and then Paul stood up on his chair, ripped his jacket off, because people always wore jackets on TVs in those days. And he had a Superman t-shirt on and red underpants over his trousers. And obviously it was a joke for Terry. And I actually laughed and thought, oh, actually, he might be a magician, but he's actually really funny. So I didn't worry so much. And then the dancers started rehearsing in London. About 4 days in, Paul came to be a part of the rehearsals. And so I can remember that first meeting because it was in Shepherd's Bush at the Una Billing studio, which is no longer there. And I was always early. So I was there before it even opened up, sitting on the wall, waiting for the doors to open. And the next person to roll up was Paul with his box of tricks. I can even remember what he was wearing. And we had this bit of banter, which in Paul's autobiography, he talks about that. And he felt we both had a connection, but I was 20 years younger than him. So therefore it was, and then in that show, he chose 4 of us to be assistants, but it was only carrying stuff on and off. I wasn't in any illusions or anything, but we then built up in live theatre shows, banter. And I was a bit cheeky to him and things like that. So it kind of, there was this working come personal relationship, sort of, glowing embers, should we say. It hadn't ignited. And Paul was still, very much, I was far too young. And then I did a royal variety show with him, where that was my first illusion I ever did with him. And it was cutting a girl in 3, and you take the middle out off to the side. And it's really funny, but the executive producer of the one show, who is a friend and has been, Paul and I were friends with him, on this Sunday just gone, in which we're in March, aren't we? He sent me a little video. And I didn't know, but Michael had bought that illusion when Paul was selling off loads of stuff years ago. And he sent a video with his 2 little boys, Callum and Braden, doing it. And he said, this was always my favorite illusion. So I was able to send back, Michael, you won't know this, but that was the first illusion I ever did with Paul.
That's such a great story.
It was a really hard one to do, but I froze, and I can remember because it was at the Palladium, and that theatre's got such a reputation. And so I was so nervous that this is with the Palladium, and I can't remember, I think it was the Queen watching, but that wide apron of a stage that it is as well. So and Paul put me in the box, and I actually had stage fright and froze. But Paul was such a cool customer. He wasn't fazed by anything. And I can remember he was whispering at me to talk me out of being nervous, and then I was fine and we got on with it. But that was my experience of, my first box jumping, as they call it in the business, that I did.
Do you know, when I was reading your story, I had such nostalgia because that first summer season that you did with Paul was at the famous Britannia Pier in Great Yarmouth. And obviously younger people, I mean, I'm in my 50s, and younger people like Jack, for example, in the studio, I mean, those years and that part of, let's say, British show business, where there was a long summer season and you could go as a star like Paul, you could go and you could literally, bed yourself into a theatre at the end of a pier or in Blackpool at one of the many theatres in Blackpool, and do a whole season, have gone now. And actually for me it was really fascinating because I spent all my childhood holidays in Great Yarmouth, and that theatre was where I saw and was introduced as a young kid to variety, because I saw all, the big variety shows. And I think that I must have just missed the Paul Daniels show, but I saw people like, I saw John Inman there headlining. I saw Peters and Lee. Do you remember Peters and Lee headlining there? And it's interesting, actually, because show business is like this, that when I saw the John Inman show, his second on the bill was Bobby Crush, who
wow,
who's now a friend of mine. So it's so interesting. But
I think also, it's now in the history books. But what we enjoyed and what people don't realise, and they talk about variety and just think, oh, it was old fashioned, but actually it was actually far better. And I'm not running the show down, but what they have on Britain's Got Talent, these summer shows auditioned their acts So they got the best from around the world. And when up the year 79 it was that Paul and I were on Britannia Pier, we had this amazing puppet act that mostly worked in Vegas, and we had, another three other, I think, circus acts. We had Jamiroquai, JK's mother, who was called Karen Kay, and she was an impersonator. She was absolutely fantastic. I mean, amazing and so glamorous. And she did Shirley Bassey and everybody. She was incredible. But then, up the road in that one year, I think there were about four other shows on. There was a play on in one thing, somebody else was at the pier down the Wellington Pier down the road. There was another big kind of old cinema that there were people. There was a circus. There was, if you went there on holiday, there really was something to do every night. And hotels didn't have shows. They just fed you and then you went to the show, didn't you? So it was such an exciting time. And for me, I was very young. The girl dancers and I would do 2 shows a night and then go out and we'd meet all these people. It was just incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I went back there, Debbie, last year because one of the people I deal with, actually, and we supply them with some very big stars, actually, is Potters, which is in a place called Hopton-on-Sea, which you will know. And Hopton is just down the road, and we supply them with people like Lulu and Jasper Carrot has been there doing it for us, and various people like that. Jason Manford has done it for us, and they invited Lucas and I there to have a weekend and see the venue, see the amazing stage, and I said we have to go to Great Yarmouth. And it was a little bit sad because, the theatre on the Wellington Pier has gone. That's gone completely. The Windmill Theatre, which you will remember on the Strip, that's now something else. And actually, the only theatre that I could find still operating, let's say, in a variety way, was the Britannia. But it's all one-nighters now. It's not long summer seasons.
One funny story I can remember from there was on the Britannia Pier, because obviously there was all the games you will remember, but also there was a lady who'd been there the whole summer, a fortune teller in a booth before you got to the theatre on the right. And so, the other dancers and I, we go and get our fortunes told. So I went in the first time with no makeup and my jeans on and things. And, she gave me a very normal sort of fortune telling of what I was going to do. And I was going to get married and have 2 children and all of this. And then I waited like 6 weeks. And then I went back all glammed up with my show stuff on. And then, oh my gosh, I got a completely different reading. So I've never been to a fortune teller since.
Well, talking of theatre, one of the things I discovered, I'm ashamed to say this, actually, I'm ashamed to admit this to you, but one of the things I discovered when I was doing my research was I did not realise that you and Paul did a very successful run in the West End with a magic show that I think at the time it was the longest running magic show that had ever been in the West End. It did incredible business. I didn't know that, Debbie.
Yeah, it wasn't the longest running magic show because there'd been one in the early 1900s along Piccadilly, but it was the longest running one-man show. And the only reason we came off was because Paul actually needed a break, because we were there for 14 months. And within that time, he'd made 2 TV series and he had his own radio show at that time. And I think he'd started his game show. So along with doing 8 shows a week, he also was doing all this other stuff and he was exhausted. So he'd said to the producers, can I just come out for a week and just have a week off and then I'll go back in. But in those days, they wouldn't ever let a theatre go dark for a week. So they said, no, if you're ready to come out, come out. But yeah, we were record breaking and sold out 2 shows a day we were doing and all of this. Oh my goodness. Yeah, it was so exciting. I wasn't Paul's girlfriend at that time, although that was the 3rd show that I did with him. And I hadn't started doing the TV shows either then. And so for me, being a young girl in London, it was so exciting. And, Stringfellows had just opened and it was just up the road, so that was our place to go for a drink after the show, and all these different clubs that people introduced us to. And I've never really been a night bird, to be honest. I'm an early morning person. So I'd only go for one, but, it was just really exciting.
So you said at the beginning of the interview that your passion, what you wanted to do effectively was to get into show business, not so much become a ballet dancer. That was a route really in, but you wanted to be in show business. So you obviously find yourself in show business, and you're having, as you've just alluded to, this fantastic life. You're in the West End. You're doing this incredible show that's getting amazing reviews and selling out. And you're not, as you say, Paul's girlfriend at this stage. So when did that sort of, spark ignite? When did that happen? When did that start to happen?
I think there was always a spark. We always got on really well. And from time to time, like during the run at the Prince of Wales Theatre, I can remember there was a big American producer that came to the show one night and wanted to take Paul out for dinner. And so he asked me if I'd like to go along. And there were loads of other big movie stars or actors in the business. I've got lovely tales about them. We haven't got time today. So, from time to time, he would take me out to dinner with them, or maybe just take me for dinner. But it was always then, oh, yeah, but you're too young. Go and find somebody your own age. So it was quite a lot later when, years later, because after the Prince of Wales Theatre, people always think I got the TV shows because I was Paul's girlfriend. But actually, while we were at the Prince of Wales early on, I'd auditioned for Paul's director of the TV shows, and I didn't get it. And then while we were at the Prince of Wales Theatre, the producer came to the Prince of Wales, and he asked me if I'd like to do the next series. So Paul wouldn't get involved, and he didn't want to have girlfriends, because then if he fell out with them, you're stuck with them. It's a problem, isn't it? So that's how I got it. And then, so after the Prince of Wales, I did my first TV show. But at that time, I was still doing a lot of commercial dancing, and I was dancing with a dance group called The Second Generation.
Dougie Squires.
Very well known. Yeah, lovely Dougie Squires, who I adore to this day. He was the obviously choreographer and the founder of them. And, I worked all over Europe. We were on tour with ABBA. We did loads of European television with different stars, Christopher, before he was famous in England. And then, I'd go back and I'd do the TV show. And then I'd do maybe I did Bournemouth summer season. But no, after the Prince of Wales, Paul just did one more summer season after that, which was at the Opera House in Blackpool in '84. So I did that. But then I'd go back dancing with Dougie and be all over the place and do pantos on my own. And then I think that because I was still doing the TV shows, but Paul also, by then, I was getting a bit older. I was 27, and he'd had other girlfriends and I'd had other boyfriends, but we still always got on. And I think he realised then I was becoming very independent, and I was getting loads of other work, that I was getting a bit older, the press wouldn't be so unkind to me, and that we really did have something, and probably a bit jealous of my boyfriends. And I bought my own flat, and he kept saying, can I buy something for you? Can I do this? I kept saying, no. I'm independent McGee here, which I've always been. I could afford a brand new car, and then I bought another property that I could rent out. So I was actually doing really well. And he actually had a girlfriend at that time, but he came to me and said, if I finish with her and I commit, can we see if we can make a go of it? So I said, well, let's see, you need to get her out of your life first and all of this. So, but anyway, that's what we did. And I was 27 then. And then when I was 28, he proposed, and we got married when I was 29.
And did you kind of face any adversity when you married Paul because of the age difference? I mean, did your family accept it, or,
Wait, as I said earlier, my wise dad, when I started seeing Paul then properly, Dad said to me, don't expect it to lead to marriage or something. He said, he's famous, he can have any girl he wants. So if you're going to go with this, just have a good time and don't have any expectations. He didn't say don't do it. You know, he was much more clever than that. But you know, he said to me, well, you know, you're self-sufficient now. And you've got, you know, Dad could see that I was doing really well on my own back anyway. So that was that. But where we did get it was, you know, the press were so cruel and they just always called me a gold digger. And, you know, the week before we got married, both our mothers were in tears with the things that they were writing, you know, that I was the gold digger and that Paul had left his wife, you know, in a council house. And they put pictures. His ex-wife was really pretty, is still a very good-looking woman. They didn't fall out. They got married too young and had been divorced for 18 years when I came on the scene. So Paul's sons at that time were just really happy that their dad was settling down, you know, because until then he just had lots of different people and he wasn't really that happy. So, but the press were evil and horrible to Paul's ex-wife, actually, you know, and camped outside her door and all the things they put. And on our actual wedding day, which was in a very big registry office, so we could do it like there was an aisle. And Dad and I were standing outside, you know, waiting for the music to start for us to walk up the aisle. And suddenly, out of a cleaner's cupboard came a journalist who then looked me up and down and said, oh, I suppose you think you look good, do you? As if I didn't. You know, how my dad didn't punch this man, I do not know. But my dad said to him, I think you better get out of here immediately. You know, so you do have to, you know, I'm just about to walk up the aisle and this guy is making me feel like I didn't look very nice. You know, we're all human. However confident people act, usually there's always a little bit of doubt in you somewhere, you know, and it just sometimes takes one little thing to set you off. Well, luckily it didn't, you know, and Dad said, oh, for heavens, don't take any notice of him. He needs to go to Specsavers or, you know, something like that. But, you know, yeah, you really have to, the press can be so difficult. And over the years, they weren't necessarily so unkind to me, but just saying I was a gold digger, but they were awful to Paul. And, you know, and anybody that met Paul will tell you he was the life and soul in a very nice way of the party. Such a caring man and gave people his time and did so much for people that he never wanted credit for and never told people about. And when he died, I got hundreds of letters, and among them were these letters from people that he'd done things for that I didn't even know about. He just helped them and that was what he was like, you know, and the press just made him out to be this brash person that he actually wasn't. Yes, he was brash because he was from the northeast, you know, so he'd grown up having to be tough, but you know, he was a, you know, a lovely soul.
I think the other thing I've always said to people, I mean, I didn't know Paul and you well. I mean, we were people that knew each other because of mutual friends like Kev Orkian, Linda Lusardi, Sam Kane, and just the general world we live in. So we would see each other at, you know, I think we've sat on the same table at functions at the Grosvenor House and things like that. But you know, something I've always said to people is that whenever I've met you and Paul together, when Paul was alive, it was so evident that you were in love, and I think everybody in the business always says that. You know, it's within the business circle, it's very well known. But I've often said that to people, you know, in terms of answering some of the things that the press have said, because you're absolutely right, they've been very unkind at times. It was just obvious to anybody that met you and Paul that you had a very strong, loving relationship.
Yeah, and we really did. You know, Paul used to always be telling people, you know, that it just got better and better. And it was so true, because if you're living with somebody you really love, I think that if the relationship works, it does get better because you understand them better. So you know the triggers. So you sometimes have to pick your moments to ask for something or bring a subject up, but you know, you also know the things that will make them angry or to avoid or whatever. So that's why the relationship gets better and stronger, doesn't it? You know, so yes, I mean, you know, I think what's kept me going since he's gone is just thinking I was so lucky, because not only did I live this fairy tale existence flying around the world, and sometimes in private jets, not always, but Paul and I really both had our feet on the ground, and really it didn't worry us if we were flying economy or first class, and we both loved people. And Paul was a person, actually, when I first worked with him, what I really realized was that the way he was raving about these circus acts that we had on the show at Yarmouth, I was talking about earlier, that he so revered people with talent. But what he respected and revered was not just people in our business, but, if the postman or our dustbin man, I don't know what you meant to call them these days, if they did their job well, Paul was totally in awe of them and had respect for them, because as human beings, he treated absolutely everybody the same. But he didn't like lazy people, and he didn't like people that, weren't driven. Because he was so driven, he could never understand why someone could just kind of wallow in self-pity and not pull themselves out of it, because he always thought you should be able to, which I think since losing him, I've become a bit more compassionate, because I wasn't totally like that, but I've always been a person that was strong, that whatever challenge life threw at me, I could get through it. And when Paul died, it was the first time that here was something that I didn't know how I was going to get through it. I didn't know how I was ever going to be happy again and not just miss him all the time.
I just want to pick up something a theme that you referenced around, obviously meeting Paul, falling in love with him, getting married, the press, which I'm so glad you mentioned, because that was one of my questions, because I've lived through that period of seeing how nasty the press can be.
Yeah.
But the press went with that narrative of gold digger and all of that, and then you find yourself on the Mrs. Merton show, and
Yeah.
you're being interviewed. And I think actually Paul had been on the Merton show as well, but you're on there.
No, he hadn't, David.
Oh, right,
no,
okay.
I was on the first series. Right, do you want me to tell the story?
Tell me the story, Debbie.
So Mrs. Merton had become famous on local radio in Manchester, this character, Mrs. Merton, and taking the mickey out of people. So then they decided to give her own TV series. So the very first series is, I was approached before Paul. So they came onto my agent about me, and because I didn't know anything about her, and I rang friends in Manchester, and they said, oh, everything she does is tongue in cheek. So, I said, okay, I'll do it. So I really didn't quite know what to expect. And it was being recorded up north. So I flew up with Chris Akabusi, which, if anyone's ever met, I'm a real giggler, but Chris Akabusi, he outshines me. And we started off from flying up together, laughing. And we'd spent the whole day together, because it was filmed in the evening, and you don't really have a rehearsal, but you're there all day. We laughed all day long. I was exhausted by the time the show came with laughing. And I'd taken, which is only a woman thing, but I'd taken this beautiful off-the-shoulder black cocktail dress to wear. But we were having such a good time, I couldn't be bothered to go and change. So I stayed in what I'd flown up in, which was a smart suit, but it wasn't what I planned. Of course, and then, it's history now, but I walked out laughing anyway. I was in such a great mood, and the first thing she asked me was, what's it like married to the millionaire Paul, or what first attracted you to the millionaire Paul Daniels? Well, I just thought that was hysterical, because A, Paul wasn't a millionaire when I married him, but B, she just married a millionaire, her bass player Hooky. So everyone thinks I laughed, at the line to do with me, which I did, but most of it was because I knew that she just married a millionaire. So it was kind of lovely. And I always say, lovely Caroline, and really miss her, that she made me famous, because until then I was just looked at as the little magician's assistant that occasionally showed up, got a shot in the Paul Daniels show. I was known, but it wasn't like my name was hugely known. But after Mrs. Merton, everybody talked to me and shouted at me, and in London for years, and I mean years afterwards, taxi drivers would shout at me if I was walking along the road, something to do with Mrs. Merton, how's your millionaire husband, Deb, and things like that. And everybody knew who I was.
It was a defining moment, wasn't it? Because I can remember it. And when I've been reading about it, people have actually attributed that line that she used, the question she asked you, as almost being one of the funniest jokes in the history of comedy, because it had such a reaction. And I can remember watching it on television and falling about laughing because of the way she did it and the charm she had. But also, I think it's fair to say, we were talking about the press earlier, that you handled it with such a plume. I mean, you really, the way you handled that was so brilliant. And as you say, it really made the name Debbie McGee, it put your name in people's consciousness.
Yeah. So, and when I talked to Caroline afterwards, much later, a couple of years later, when we met up at some charity event, and she said to me, the thing that people remember about my show is that line. I will never lose it. If you ask people about the Mrs. Merton show, it's usually one of the things that they remember.
Well, they don't come any more lovelier than the wonderful Debbie McGee. And this is actually a first for the Schmoozing podcast, because we decided to do a very special Debbie McGee two-parter. So please listen next week when you'll hear the remainder of my conversation with Debbie. Also, don't forget to rate, review, and above all, subscribe to Schmoozing podcast. Stay safe, stay positive, and stay with me for more celebrity schmoozing next week.